I'm starting to feel a little bit nervous because if you know, I've kind of been under wraps for a while. This is my first time out.
Rachel Zegler, once hailed as Disney's next unstoppable golden girl and the fresh face meant to carry a new generation into the studio's future, is now reportedly scrambling behind closed doors in a desperate effort to salvage whatever remains of her crumbling public image. As multiple industry insiders claim, she has been aggressively pressuring Fox to either cancel or heavily rewrite an upcoming episode of The Simpsons that mercilessly skewers her Snow White controversy, portraying a thinly veiled, self-important caricature who hijacks a beloved fairy tale and turns it into a chaotic, lecturing spectacle. A portrayal sources say has sent her into a private meltdown. Behind the scenes, she is reportedly furious and deeply shaken, viewing the parody not as harmless satire but as a permanent branding scar that could define her career in the worst possible way, fearing that once the episode airs, the mockery will follow her forever, reshaping her image from serious actress to industry punchline. Those close to her allegedly say she is convinced this single episode could undo any remaining goodwill she has left with both studios and audiences, effectively sealing her fate at a time when her reputation is already under relentless attack across social media. As if the situation were not dire enough, Rachel's sudden disappearance from the public eye has only intensified speculation, as she reportedly boarded a flight to Colombia just days after the Simpsons parody leak and following months of non-stop backlash, with her team quickly framing the trip as a personal getaway, though critics and commentators alike are calling that explanation suspicious given the timing. With her social media accounts suddenly going silent, multiple interviews abruptly cancelled, and her representatives issuing no meaningful statements, rumors are now spiraling that she may be attempting to flee the media firestorm altogether, quietly sidestep potential legal or contractual fallout with Disney, or simply vanish from public view until the outrage burns itself out. Meanwhile, back in Burbank, the mood inside Disney's headquarters is reportedly tense and volatile, with executives said to be blindsided and furious over how spectacularly the Snow White project has imploded, transforming what was once forecast as $1 billion nostalgic revival into one of the studio's most embarrassing public relations disasters in recent memory. According to insiders, frustration within the company has only grown as they watch public sentiment continue to sour, fueled in large part by Rachel's own interviews, which many believe poured gasoline on an already raging fire by reframing the story's themes in ways longtime fans felt dismissed or distorted the legacy of the original film. Even as backlash mounted, Rachel continued pushing the narrative that the film was meant to deliver a bold modern message about fairness, compassion, and inner virtue over appearance, but critics argue that those comments only widened the divide between the production and its audience, turning what should have been a triumphant career-defining role into a cautionary tale about fame, ego, and the brutal speed at which public favor can collapse. Behind closed doors, sources now claim that Disney is quietly weighing severe financial penalties against Rachel, including the possible enforcement of strict morality clauses that could slash bonuses or even seek restitution tied to the studio's reported hundreds of millions in losses connected to the film's collapse, a collapse that many are now openly calling catastrophic as insiders point to a production budget rumored to be near the $300 million mark and a crushing wave of negative audience response reflected in its abysmal IMDb score, with critics and commentators alike declaring the movie a full-blown identity crisis that satisfied neither modern audiences nor longtime fans. What makes the situation even more explosive is the unusually visible internal fury now rippling through a company that normally handles controversy with polished, almost surgical discretion, turning this debacle into one of the most openly vicious behind-the-scenes reckonings Disney has faced in years, and according to industry veterans, it truly didn't have to end this way. When Rachel Zegler first stepped into the role of Snow White, there was real and widespread excitement, as she was fresh off her critically acclaimed performance in West Side Story and carried the kind of breakout momentum studios dream of, the type of star power that usually guarantees goodwill before a single trailer even drops. But that magic began to evaporate almost immediately once the press tour kicked off, as instead of celebrating the timeless legacy of Snow White, Rachel's interviews became peppered with remarks that many fans interpreted as thinly veiled disdain for the original film, including one now infamous clip in which she smirked while calling the 1937 prince a stalker and dismissing the story as strange and outdated. Those comments landed like a lead balloon across the internet, instantly reframing what should have been excitement for a modern reimagining into outrage, with audiences accusing her of sounding dismissive, arrogant, and too detached from the very story she was meant to honor, triggering a tidal wave of backlash, viral memes, and open calls for boycotts. As the controversy grew, attention quickly expanded beyond just her comments to the uncomfortable dynamic between Rachel and her co-star Gal Gadot, what should have been an easy, charming promotional pairing instead morphing into one of the coldest and most awkward PR duos Hollywood had seen in years, with viewers noticing visible tension during red carpet appearances, forced smiles in joint interviews, and an unmistakable lack of natural chemistry. The chill reached its peak under the brightest spotlight possible at the Oscars, where audiences observed no warm glances, no shared laughter, no genuine interaction at all, only stiff body language, separate energy, and an atmosphere so uncomfortable it quickly became the subject of online dissection. With the film now labeled a financial disaster, her name dominating controversy headlines, and her relationship with both fans and the studio seemingly fractured, what once looked like a dream career path has instead transformed into a cautionary tale about how swiftly Hollywood can turn when perception, publicity, and profit all collapse at once. Insiders soon began whispering that Gal Gadot, ever the polished industry veteran, was quietly and deliberately distancing herself from Rachel. Determined not to be dragged down into what had rapidly become a growing public relations inferno, and the rift didn't stay hidden for long because fans noticed, journalists noticed, and soon the storyline of Snow White's two leading queens at odds became yet another layer of chaos surrounding the film. What was supposed to be a glittering celebration of a beloved classic instead mutated into a textbook case of how to alienate a core audience, with commentators openly calling it Disney's most expensive self-inflicted disaster to date as box office projections turned bleak and analysts predicted staggering losses. Rachel's sudden vanishing act to Colombia only deepened the damage, as she remained completely silent while her team scrambled behind the scenes to figure out their next move, and Disney desperately worked to contain the financial bleeding.
Yeah, what was that like, Rachel?
Yeah, tell me what it's like, Don. No, I mean it's all professional work, so it's very fun.
Meanwhile, fans began counting down to the inevitable episode of The Simpsons that was rumored to parody the entire mess, with many believing it would mark the final transformation of Rachel Zegler from controversial starlet into a permanent Hollywood cautionary tale. And while she attempted to retreat into silence, the world outside kept moving, and not in her favor, because as Snow White stumbled out of theaters, another film stormed the box office with unstoppable momentum. Minecraft shattered expectations with a massive global opening that instantly became the internet's favorite point of comparison. Viral clips flooded platforms like TikTok and Reddit, showing overflowing Minecraft screenings packed with cheering kids and families, while Snow White theaters looked eerily empty by comparison, the side-by-side visuals so brutal they felt like salt being poured directly into an open wound. Every meme, every montage, every thread comparing packed auditoriums to abandoned rows of seats sent the same deafening message: audiences weren't just indifferent to Rachel's Snow White, they were actively rejecting it. But the deepest cultural death blow was still waiting in the wings, because when The Simpsons finally enters the picture, it doesn't whisper, it detonates. In their upcoming episode, Springfield unleashes a fictional film called Snowwoke, the reimagining, a savage parody centered on a character unmistakably modeled after Rachel, an animated crusader who bans princes, deletes the dwarfs, and spends the entire runtime lecturing increasingly irritated villagers about systemic oppression. The satire isn't subtle, it isn't gentle, and it isn't forgiving. It functions as a blistering indictment of everything critics and fans have accused both Rachel and Disney of mishandling, and whether she likes it or not, the world is now watching to see if she will ever reclaim the spotlight or quietly fade into the shadows as one of Hollywood's most high-profile cautionary tales. And with the so-called villain of the story now firmly cemented in the public narrative, the parody wasn't just another late-night jab, it became something far darker and more permanent, because for Rachel, the episode of The Simpsons wasn't satire anymore. It was a career obituary written in bright yellow ink and broadcast on primetime television for the entire world to laugh at, and Hollywood noticed immediately and loudly. Studios that once lined up to work with her, the very same ones that rushed to attach their names to her after the breakout success of West Side Story, reportedly went eerily quiet almost overnight, as casting calls she was rumored to headline suddenly vanished, projects quietly shuffled forward with different names attached, and the silence itself became the statement. Publicly, there were no formal announcements, but privately the message was unmistakable. Rachel had become a brand risk, not just because of Snow White's failure, but because her entire public image, once a symbol of fresh-faced Hollywood promise, now carried the heavy baggage of controversy, ridicule, mummification, and growing audience disdain, and no studio wants to gamble hundreds of millions on a leading actress who could ignite a public relations firestorm before the first trailer even drops. The humiliation didn't end with memes or animated satire either, because another bizarre layer of online chaos soon piled on when an AI-generated fake OnlyFans account using Rachel's likeness exploded in popularity, pulling in thousands of followers within hours as people mistook it for real. And while she had absolutely nothing to do with it, the fact that so many believed it instantly spoke volumes about how far her image had slipped. The wholesome Disney princess fantasy was effectively dead, and in its place stood a messy, chaotic, meme-ready version of Rachel that the internet seemed addicted to dragging through the mud, turning every new incident into viral spectacle. What should have been a fleeting scandal instead became a cultural pulse check, and the verdict was brutal. The public no longer saw her as a rising star, but as a punchline. And then came the final blow that sealed it all in pop culture history. The Simpsons episode officially aired, and with it, Rachel's transformation from controversial actress into full-blown cultural cautionary tale felt complete, as Springfield's residents mocked, laughed, cringed, and savaged the tone-deaf parody in a way that critics said mirrored exactly how audiences felt about the real-world disaster, right down to the unnecessary musical numbers, the forced modernized feminist reinvention, and the erasure of the classic elements fans loved. And whether she ever steps back into the spotlight again or fades quietly from it, one thing now feels undeniable: the moment that was supposed to crown her career instead rewrote her legacy, and not in the way anyone once imagined. The reaction to the episode was savage, with critics and viewers alike slamming it as relentlessly political across every possible dimension: race, gender, class, power, calling its narrative cowardly, heavy-handed, and completely stripped of the magic that once defined the fairy tale. As Springfield's townspeople yawned through the monologues, booed the rewritten story beats, and ultimately walked out muttering that the magic was dead. And in the modern entertainment landscape, being mocked by The Simpsons doesn't just mean you're controversial, it means you've crossed into spectacle, that you're no longer the headline, you are the joke itself. For Rachel Zegler, whose rise once looked like it was literally scripted from a fairy tale, there could be no more brutal or symbolic turning point than this, a moment where satire hardened into permanence and public perception calcified overnight. Yes, Hollywood history is filled with fallen stars who crashed hard and clawed their way back into relevance, and redemption is never fully off the table. But Rachel's next move won't just have to be good, it will have to be flawless, surgically precise, and nearly impossible in an industry where image is currency. Because her image hasn't just been damaged, it's been shattered, remixed, mummified, and redistributed beyond her control, frozen in the internet's permanent record as a cultural warning label. The public isn't waiting in excitement for her next role anymore, they're waiting to see whether she can even survive the cultural storm that Snow White unleashed. And now, thanks to Springfield's brutal, animated honesty, that storm no longer fades with time, it has been immortalized.